All right, so we are recording now, so I will share my screen. All right. So did anybody have any questions? I apologize for any confusion last week about the length of the class. That was something new to me that was presented. So did anybody have any questions? I didn't get any responses from students. So hopefully that all made sense. You were probably aware of it, and then I just mistakenly extended the class. But everything on the syllabus is corrected now, so we should be good to go. Any questions on any of the changes to the syllabus? Great. Okay, so just a couple brief announcements. Just a reminder, your course introduction assignment is due by 11:59 this Saturday, August 28th. Tomorrow, I am going to be posting just an update on this, not the assignment itself, but a response that I want you to provide to one of your classmates by this Tuesday, August 31st. So it's not going to be long. It's going to be a quick 300-word response. I'll lay everything out when I post the outline tomorrow of what I expect. And then when you can jump on, when everybody posts, spend a little bit of time finding a post you want to respond to, and I'll lay out what I'm looking for. What I want you to do, just really quick here, is find somebody that you can challenge, somebody you might disagree with, either completely or in part. Maybe you agree with their position on something, or a particular law, their position on a law, but you would go about it differently. So share different thoughts. Like I said, I'll lay all that out, but I really want to push you. A lot of times in my classes, students will just respond to classmates, and it's all, hey, good job. I agree with you. That's great. Good thoughts, right? And that's fine. I mean, I think that's great. And we want to encourage each other and let people, other classmates, know they're doing a good job. But we also want to challenge each other too. And sometimes it's hard to go out and challenge a classmate, but we're all going to take it in stride, right? It's going to be respectful and thoughtful. I'll lay all that out. Your quiz for chapters 3 and 14 will be posted tomorrow. So you'll have to complete those by Tuesday, the 31st, August 31st by 11:59. And then I will also post your first apply knowledge assignment. And that'll be due a week from Saturday. It's not, I think, if you're engaged in the material and you look at what's required in the assignment, it's pretty straightforward. And of course, once it's out tomorrow, you'll have an opportunity to ask me any questions that you might have. All right. Any questions on any of those announcements? Great. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. So we're talking about chapter 1 and chapter 2 tonight, right? So hopefully you had a chance. I know initially we just had a quiz on chapter 1, but sent out an email about reading chapter 2 as well. So hopefully you were able to get that done. So we'll talk about both chapter 1 and chapter 2 tonight, and hopefully drill down, maybe answer some questions you had, clarify some topics, and just give you a better understanding of the content of these two chapters. These two chapters, I know I've talked a lot about this class and what I like about the class, and I'm not sure if I really covered this component of it. This class builds, right? Even though I'm not testing you on every chapter on the final and the different units, I'm testing you differently. The concepts, the terms, the concepts and the terms in all of these chapters, you'll see them again and again. And when we get together and we talk about different things, you'll say, oh yeah, we talked about that at the beginning of the semester maybe, right? Because everything that we're going to talk about is started here, right? Foundational principles of the country. And then when we start connecting that to issues and start connecting it to concepts with the, let's say the media, for instance, like what's the role of media in politics and government, right? We're going to be able to refer back to a lot of these concepts. When we talk about civil liberties and civil rights, we're going to go back to the Constitution, right? We're going to be talking about federalism, right? What's the state's role in protecting civil liberties? What's the federal government's role? What happens when the federal government or the states violate civil liberties or civil rights? And so we can tie all those issues back to the Constitution and issues of federalism in our democracy. So keep that in mind, right? And like I said, when you're done with a chapter, you're not done with it, right? We're going to carry these terms and concepts with us. So tonight in chapter 1, we're going to talk about politics. What is it, right? What's government? A lot of times those words are used together, but they're related, but they're distinct concepts. We're going to be talking about government systems and economic systems, and why sometimes we conflate systems of government with economic systems, right? And I realize that you've read a lot of this in the text, but I want to highlight some of these things, give you an opportunity to ask any questions. And then in our system of government, when we have a capitalist economic system where a lot of goods and services, many, if not most, goods and services are produced in the private sector, why government? Why do we have government? What's the role of government? So that's very important for us to explore. And then we're going to talk about, well, who rules in America? If we're talking about what is democracy, and then who rules in America? So what is our system of government? What are the principles that we're founded on? And democracy is obviously very important to how we operate and the foundational values that the founders implemented into the Constitution, the US Constitution. All right. So this is one of those things where I like you to just, and there's no, right? Don't worry about having the wrong answer. Don't worry about having it exactly right. Maybe you'll knock it out of the park. But I guess a couple different questions. Maybe first we'll ask, when you hear the word politics, what do you think about? Can anybody share what you think about when you hear that word politics? Go ahead, Benjamin.
I think of elections and political parties.
And why do you think about elections and political parties?
Because that's what's involved in politics.
Okay, very good. So, I mean, we have this idea, right, with this politics, right? So who's involved in politics, right? What happens in politics? We have these kind of these processes of choosing leaders and campaigning, right? So there you go. So we think of political parties. We think of who's involved, right? Where do those what issues do those political parties take up? Who are those candidates? What's important to those candidates? All right. What else? See if I can pull up the chat, see if anybody's jumping in there. All right. Anybody else want to share?
Politics seems to be like the competition as to see who gets to control the government and not.
So it's the competition, right? Of who gets to make these decisions, right? We always talk about what government's doing, what decisions are being made, what policies are being implemented. Well, who gets to decide those, right? There's a competition, right, of different groups, different individuals on a lot of different levels, right? We have policy instituted at all these different levels of government, all these governmental bodies making decisions that impact our lives. So people are competing to fill those seats so that they can be a part of making those decisions as a representative. That's great. So how does that word make you feel? Do you feel that that's politics? Do you shy away from it? Do you think it's like, it's something that I don't want to talk about? Or do you get excited when you hear that word? Or maybe somewhere in between?
Recently, it seems like it's had a
Go ahead.
negative. It seems recently like politics had a negative connotation with it.
Right, it has right, a lot of times it's politics, right? I mean, if you're a political junkie like me, right, maybe some of you are, or at least like to learn about issues. You find out about who's running for office, right? It's fascinating, right? And we learn all these different aspects of politics and how institutions operate. And I study political behavior, so that's just absolutely fascinating to me, how people behave, how candidates behave, how elected officials behave. But a lot of people hear politics, right? And it's not just in government, right? Office politics, right? That has a negative connotation, right? You could have politics in a little league, right? Different organizations unrelated to government have politics, right? We throw this word around as a pejorative, right? It's a negative term, but is it really? And that's what we want to talk about here. What is politics? And I think Sebastian and Benjamin was getting at it as well. Right? There's groups of people that are competing, right? We think of political parties and the candidates within those political parties, they're competing to make decisions, right? So, but what are they deciding? Okay. They are deciding, if I can get this to go, there we go, who gets what, when, and how. And if we think of politics in that term, that word politics, that doesn't seem so bad, right? We're trying to figure out who gets what, when, and how. Right? So then you go on, right? It's that process of gaining and exercising control within government for the purpose of setting public policy, right? Making decisions. So that's just right where that's not so bad, right? So think of politics as the competition. You have people that want to win the game, right? So you have people competing, they want to win this game. Not so bad, right? It happens all the time, right? We compete in sports, we compete in other activities. Not so bad. I want you to separate that from the political process, right? That's usually where the negative, when we hear about the negative views or feelings about politics, we're thinking about the political process, right? The negative campaigning, the backroom deals, right? The lobbyists, the interest groups impacting policy, right? These are the terms we hear, right? When we hear, when people despise Congress or Congress gets dismal approval ratings, right? Those are the kind of things people bring up in survey after survey. And that's really about the political process. Politics is just simply a neutral term that lays out, right? People trying to compete to decide who gets what, when, and how, right? They're competing. All right, so what's government? How does government relate? Anybody? Pull up my chat again. So if we think about people competing, does anybody play sports? Does anybody have an activity where they compete? Anybody give me an example of things that they like to do where they compete? Go ahead, Benjamin.
Something I like to do or I like to compete is an online sim racing series. I actually run one.
It's what again? Say that again.
An online simulated racing series.
Okay, very cool. So you say you run one. What's your job?
I race and I also administrate, so usually I'll finish towards the back.
Okay, so when you say administrate, what does that mean?
It means I'll, like, if a driver is wrongfully given a black flag, I will give them a lap back or clear the black flag.
Okay, so this black flag, where did that come from?
It's where it's like when you go in, it's like where they do something that's wrong and they make you go into the pits and give you like a penalty.
Who decided it was wrong?
If a driver feels they've been wrongfully given a black flag.
Okay, so what I'm getting at, right, is you're as the administrator, you're administering something, right? You're making sure people are following the rules.
Yep.
Is there a process in which, how are these rules created? What's the process?
Well, they're created through a rule book.
And who
the
creates
rule book
that
is
rule book?
I create the rule book.
Okay, there you go. So you've created, so we have Benjamin that creates the rule book for his, is it a racing club you said?
Yes.
Okay, so for his racing club that he administers, he also races in, right? And if people don't want to join his club, they don't have to. But if they're going to join his club, they have to follow the rules. If they don't follow the rules, right, are there consequences, Benjamin? Said the black flag, but are there other
Well, that's if it's during
consequences?
the race, sometimes a suspension or
Okay.
permanent ban.
Right? So let me ask you, what would happen if the racers just did whatever they wanted to do? Anybody can chime in.
Well,
What if-
they would be suspended or permanently banned.
Okay, now what if there were no rules? What would happen? Would that
It would just be a
race,
free-for-all.
it would be a free-for-all. Would that race be safe?
No.
Wouldn't be safe. Wouldn't you, no one could ever know who really won, right? People are, behaving badly, right? All of these things, right? So let's take that and put it in the realm of the political and governmental arena, right? So you have your racers are competing, right? So you have people that want to win the race, right? They want to win. So they're competing to win. The rules of the game for our purposes here are government, right? Government are the institutions and the framework in which the game is played, in which the competition is carried out, right? So think about our institutions in Congress, the US House, the US Senate, right? You can't just go in and say,
The governorship.
okay, I have this law, I have this legislation, this bill. Today, we're just going to pass it through the House of Representatives and send it to the president. Nope, doesn't work that way, right?
Has to go through the Senate.
It has to go through the Senate. And not only does it have to go through the Senate, the identical pieces of legislation have to pass out of both houses, not kind of sort of similar, not almost exact, right? And if that process isn't followed, right, you have a black flag, right? The legislation cannot move forward. So think about politics as the competition. Think about government as the administrators and the rules of the game. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? I hope it does, right? Because that's really where it comes out, right? So the rules of the game, how this game operates. Okay. All right. So like I said, the formal institutions, right, where there's a variety of formal institutions, our city councils, city government, state government, our legislatures, right? So we have these formal institutions. And what are institutions? It's very important, right? So institutions are these ongoing organizations. And the longer these organizations, these institutions exist, the more we rely on them, we put trust in them to make these decisions or carry out these particular functions, right? There wasn't, and we'll talk about things like the Articles of Confederation that was in place before the US Constitution, right? Wasn't a lot of faith there in the national government, right? Wasn't a lot of time to build up institutions. But the longer an institution is in place, the longer, the more that institution has legitimacy, right? So we give our government institutions legitimacy by abiding by those decisions because they've been in place for so long. Okay. All right, so now we turn, so we've talked a little bit about, right, government. So we have government, right, is in charge of making sure all the players in this competition abide by the rules. And there's even a process of establishing government, which we'll talk about when it comes to the Constitution. And we'll talk more about that with federalism as well in that chapter. But it's really important because a lot of our civil discourse today, and it's been going on for a long time, it's not just today, but for decades, revolves around capitalism, right? The economic system in this country, right? So what happens, right? You have public policy that impacts an economic system. And so all of a sudden you have people conflating the two because they do intertwine themselves, right? They are related. One impacts the other. and vice versa. A lot of times this gets conflated. So I just want, the book does a good job. Just want to kind of talk through the differences between government and economic systems, right? In the United States, our governing system is a representative democracy or representative republic. Our economic system is capitalism, right? So why do people conflate these two? Well, the idea surrounding both government institutions, or the form of government we have here, comes from social contract theorists like John Locke. We talk about, we can see this in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, where you see language such as life, liberty, and property, right? These are individual rights or liberties. We have the right to have property. We have the right to live our lives the way we want, right? We're individuals. We're not seen as a part of a group or a collective. We as individuals have the ability, we're kind of the central focus of the government. Yeah, Benjamin, go ahead.
So what is the difference between life, liberty, and property, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Because I'm more familiar with the latter one.
Yeah, so there's both. So it was changed, right? So we talk about in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So social contract theorists identified these concepts of life, liberty, and property. So if you read social contract literature, you go through there, right? That's the reference, because you just identifying, like I said, property was important to that philosophy, okay? Because the individual could own property. It wasn't the government owning property or others saying what you could own or what you couldn't. So that was just a language change to kind of highlight the spirit of the country, right? So this pursuit of happiness, that it encompassed a lot more of the American spirit. It's more than just property. It was really to say, look, it's more than that. It's property. It's all of this. We're basically American citizens, could be anything they want. So does that make sense? So it's kind of more it was more encompassing. That good. Does that answer your question, Benjamin? Great question. Great question. All right. So when you have social contract theorists that looked at individuals that had to have a stake in their government, they had to have their voices heard. They talked about placing limits on government, right? Things that the government couldn't do to impact the individuals, right? Pursuit of happiness or property, life, liberty, these things, right? And at the same time, you had individuals like Adam Smith talk about the wealth of nations, right? And then they're talking about competition, individuals creating products, providing services, companies and individuals competing, bad products falling out of the market, that competition lowering costs. Sorry, I got a little hung up there. IT was supposed to fix this, and apparently they didn't. Our meeting looks like it's going to end again in 10 minutes, so we'll just, when we get booted off, just log back in. Sorry about that. They told me they fixed this. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that. So, but when that happens, if it happens, just log back in. Same link. So both systems, the government system, the economic system, was based on the individual pursuit of property, wealth, right? Selling goods for a profit, and the individual being able to pursue their own dreams and goals without oppressive government, right? We can see how those things are related. So it's important to differentiate between the two. Okay? So just to kind of give you, just to compare that, you have things like socialism, right? Who can tell me, is socialism a government system or an economic system? Anybody want to take a shot at that?
It's economic.
It's economic. Great job. So why is it economic? Morgan or anybody else?
It's economic because it's a means of generating wealth by the government, not by private individuals.
Absolutely. Great job. So, right. So it's who owns the means of production? Capitalism, there's private ownership. In socialism, the means of production, right? Who owns the entities that are providing the goods and services? In a socialist economic system, the government does, right? And it's about the means of production, what's being produced, okay? Not what policies are being made, but what's being produced as products and services. Very nice job, Morgan. So a lot of times, just like we have here, where those values of individualism create similarities in both the economic and government system, in countries that have socialism, oftentimes you'll see oligarchies, right? Ruled by elites, small group of individuals, ruled by one party. And what happens is the policies made by these individuals that run government, right, reinforce the socialist economic policy. Right? So same thing as here with the representative republic and capitalism. You see that here, right? One reinforces the other, at least theoretically, right? We're having different conversations today about that in this country, but we can get to that at a later date. But very nice job, everybody. Okay, so I kind of alluded to this when we went over the agenda for chapter 1, but if in this country, if most of the goods and services, majority of goods and services are provided by the private entities, why is government necessary, right? What is government's role when we talk about goods and services? What's government's role? What does government have to provide that the private sector won't? Any thoughts?
Stability and security.
Stability and security for what?
Those private entities.
Okay, very good, right? So they have to protect, right? Government has a role, right? If I have a business on Main Street, right, down the block, right? Government has a role in making sure my business isn't looted, right? Okay, so they have a role in that, absolutely. So there's important role for government there in protecting private enterprise. Very good. What else is government's role in this system of providing goods and services? Can anybody think of a good or service that the government provides? Any example? Just throw it out there.
Military or police department?
Military, police department, any other ones? Those are two very good ones. How about a couple more? Anybody?
Oh, education.
Education? One more. Anybody? All right, I'll help you out. Roads. Did anybody drive on roads lately? All right. So why aren't, you talk about the military. You talk about, what else do we say? Police, education, right? At least public education. There is private education, but public education is a substantial part of what federal government's involved in, state governments and local governments are involved in, absolutely. And then roads. Why is government involved in those things? Where is the system broken down? Why isn't that being provided in the private sector?
Probably because the private sector doesn't have anything necessarily to gain from those. Besides with like the private like schools, then they can gain, tuition and money. So
Absolutely. So great answer, right? So individuals, companies, corporations, they have a profit motive, right? And there's some things that, number one, companies just can't do, right? So providing military to protect an entire country, right? It would be almost impossible for a corporation to do all of that, right? To have the means and the knowledge to be able to do that. Yeah, there's private security companies, so they're a part, right? They work together and they can be a part of that process, but to provide that, number one, right, as Morgan said, well, it said number one, it's almost impossible, but number two, like Morgan said, where's the profit motivation to be able to do that, right? I'm going to do that. What would be my return on my investment? It's not going to be there. It's not going to be possible. So companies aren't going to do that. So if you take the profit motive out of it, if it doesn't exist, it's not going to be, the private entities aren't going to provide that, right? You have private security for wealthy individuals that have the means, right? Do they just say, oh, I'm just going to provide that? It's good for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and pay out of my pocket to protect everybody else? Doesn't happen, right? If wealthy people, of individuals, corporations, if they were in charge of building roads, guess what? Guess where those roads would go? Those roads would go wherever those individuals needed to go. And my guess, there would be, if somebody wanted to use those roads, they would have to pay a tax or they would have to pay a toll to use those roads, right? So that's great. I mean, sounds like Morgan, great answer. That fact, right? Just think about that. What is the profit motive, right? And that's where the government has to step in, right? So we have private goods, right? Right, which our cell phones, our cars, you name it, right? There's a market for a variety of different goods and services where individuals and companies can make money, right? And that's where those goods and services are created. And then all of those things that Sebastian, I think somebody else had mentioned, where you have those goods that there's a gap, right? There's a service gap. I think Morgan mentioned private school, right? Not everybody can afford private school, right? But we've decided as a society, right, as a culture, that education is very important. So government has a role in educating individuals, right? And if individuals can't afford private school, the government has to provide that, right? So you have these public goods when there's a gap in what the private sector will not offer, right? And then you have toll goods. They can be both public and private, but those are only available to those that can afford it, right? From a public standpoint, again, private education. From a public standpoint, right? Everyone, back when I lived in Illinois, toll roads galore everywhere. So you have the public government, looking to pay for the roads through tolls, but not everybody used the toll roads. Not everybody could afford to use the toll roads. So, and then the last one, right? So we've talked, Sebastian mentioned, right, protecting government's role in protecting free enterprise. Morgan talked about why the government needs to step in, because the market, the private sector market won't create something if there's no profit motivation. And then there's another substantial, significant role for government, and that's common goods. What are common goods?